Hello everyone. Today we're looking at a deck that uses Storm the Festival to play out good cards around 4 and 5 mana costs, and then follow up by copying some of those things with Tamiyo and Esika's Chariot. I talked a bit in my Tegrid Despair video about how building around that card can be a trap. What that means is that you often see it, get excited, and try to fit in everything that works with that card, but end up diluting the effectiveness of your deck in the process. Well, continuing in that tradition, Storm the Festival can also be a trap. We've only got 3 copies in here, and I'll tell you my logic for that. You have to have a certain critical mass of good 5-cost and maybe 4-cost permanents to hit off of your Storm the Festival. However, too many of these, and you're stuck doing nothing in the early game. Then, unlike a control deck, you've got no way to wipe the board or play something super expensive to mount a comeback. So to at least try and help with some of that, I tried to give us some early plays and keep our permanents that we hit off the festival right on the edge of what was acceptable as far as how many we have in the deck. Everything else that we've got in here can then copy those things from the graveyard like Tamiyo, or press an advantage and copy the tokens from the battlefield, as in the case of Esika's Chariot. The thing that drew me to this deck in particular was the Consuming Blob. It's got some of that Tarmogoyf flavor, and definitely, if left unchecked, should be able to win games by itself. But I will say some of the time, Blob feels a little bit like a win more card. Anyway, let's break the deck down a little bit. I've got 3 copies of Syncopate in here, and that is really just kind of a step to shore up the early game. Green and blue does not have great removal, so it's kind of between this and Fading Hope. But there's so many. I'll tell you, I face green-white enchantments so often on the ladder that most of my decks are built to deal with just that deck in the early game. Because if they go first, if you let them kind of go unchecked for too long, there's no way you're coming back. Especially in a deck like this, where by the time you've hit 5 mana, they might have the Kami of Transience, the Spirit that puts counters on things, the Jeskai Naturalist, and maybe even a copy of Hallowed Haunting or 2, and there's no way we can come back from that. So anything we can do here to kind of manage the early game a bit better in these colors is what I wanted to try. And so Syncopate works great. It can exile things that are super annoying, and can often come in handy later in the game, since we usually do have a pretty good abundance of mana after we start going off with Storm the Festival. We've got Wrenn and Seven in here getting us lands. So later in the game, Syncopate can still remain useful. Anyway, that's enough about the very first card in the deck. Let's go on to the next couple of things we've got in here. So early game creature-wise, we've got Malevolent Hermit as kind of a one-of. Pretty good against control-ish decks that want to remove some of our stuff, and could just be a real kind of delay tactic in the early game, no matter what deck we're facing. Next, we've got 4 copies of Suspicious Stowaway. It's a pretty good early looter card. It's not going to win any games on its own, but it's going to get in some good chip damage and is useful for also taking out opposing planeswalkers. We can put some counters on it with our next card, the Inscription of Abundance, in a pinch, and it can often just get through and take out a Lulth or something else that usually has a lot of blockers behind it. A couple of copies of the Cemetery Illuminator. This takes some things out of the opposing deck, but it also lets us play stuff off of the top of our deck, which is occasionally relevant. As I said, when you get into those situations where you might be trying to come from behind, this can let you play off the top of your deck if it's got the right thing exiled behind it. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Dreamshackle Geist. It's a 3/1 flyer for 3 mana, and at the beginning of combat, you can tap an opposing creature or make sure an opposing creature does not untap during its controller's next untap step. Really handy in kind of a mid-rangey deck like this, and it pairs really well with Tamiyo so that you can effectively shut off 1 or 2 of the opponent's best creatures, and also tap blockers, and get in for some damage in a pinch. So it's a really interesting card. I want to try to maybe build a Spirits deck or something that uses a little bit more of this card, but I find it really interesting and pretty effective rate. Elite Spellbinder, for example, is a similar mana cost, and of course the ability is a bit better, but that if you leave an Elite Spellbinder on the board, like that card can finish a game if left unchecked due to its 3/1 power toughness. 1 copy of the Celestus. It's good for the life gain. It's good for the incidental looting that we get off of it, and helps get us up to Storm the Festival mana faster. 4 Esika's Chariot. Not going to say too much about this, but it copies our Wrenn and Seven tokens. It can copy Tamiyo tokens that get created out of the graveyard, and it's a great card. 2 copies of the Mind Flayer. This can come in handy in some situations where you might be against, let's say, a runes deck or something that really piles on and makes one creature huge. Stealing that can try to rain on their parade a little bit. Next up, 3 Consuming Blob. That's our wannabe Tarmogoyf over there. And if left unchecked, that just kind of gets out of control for the opponent. So looked like fun. Wanted to give it a try in here. Wrenn and Seven you've seen before, as well as Tamiyo Compleated Sage. Now, remember that Tamiyo, if you cast it for the reduced mana cost, it's going to come in with 3 loyalty instead of 5. So if you're hoping to copy something out of the graveyard with that, just keep that in mind. It definitely happened to me once, maybe twice. And then 3 copies, of course, of Storm the Festival. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little experiment with Consuming Blob and Storm the Festival. We're fitting in a couple of creatures that don't see a lot of play here, and just experimenting with some other stuff that I thought might be effective in this style of deck. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
know the trick. Trees can fight their own battles. Even in defeat, we grow. The will of the woods is made manifest.
story infects the mind, because such an imperfect form. Your resistance is noted. You do not write this story. Such an imperfect form.
Those who harm the forest destroy the gifts you feed the trees. They prepare for war.
You forge your memories.